Okay, now let's talk about the levels of the psyche according to Carl Jung. So, he termed consciousness as images that are sensed by the ego, whereas unconscious elements have no relationship with the ego. Ego as the center of consciousness, but not the core of personality, because the center of personality is the self that is largely unconscious. So for Carl Jung, in a psychologically healthy person, the ego takes a secondary position to the unconscious self. And healthy individuals are in contact with their conscious world, but they also allow themselves to experience their unconscious self and thus to achieve individuation. Alright, so kung babalikan natin yung theory ni Freud, no, to compare lang naman dito sa theory ni Carl Jung, makikita natin na dinivide niya yung levels, di ba, of mental life into conscious, pre-conscious, and unconscious. Ngayon, dito kay Carl Jung, merong dalawa, no? Actually, dalawa siya, conscious and unconscious. Sabi niya, yung conscious part, ito yung parang island daw, no? Kasi 'di ba yung kay Freud iceberg. Kay Carl Jung naman, kinompare niya yung mind natin or yung psyche sa island. Yan. So kung yung island ay yun yung conscious part, yung above water na land, and then yung unconscious, yun yung below, no? Yun yung nasa ilalim. Ngayon, yung tinatawag niya, yun nga lang, yung unconscious level niya, dinivide niya rin yun sa dalawa, which is the personal and the collective. So, yung personal, ito yung land na hindi masyadong covered, no? Or hindi laging covered ng sea. Kumbaga, pwede siyang nakikita, no? Pwedeng hindi. Yan. So, partly, alam mo yun, conscious and unconscious. That is the personal unconscious. Personal because it seems that the events that we experience personally, yan, that are, no longer within our conscious awareness. No? But it doesn't mean that they are repressed, no? It doesn't mean that they are repressed just according to Freud. Because according to Carl Jung, it's kind of normal. It's not something that repressed or wishes or desires. Hindi ganon. Okay? And then, the collective unconscious, that is the part which is mostly unconscious talaga. Kumbaga, hindi talaga siya walang conscious component. Hindi talaga siya napupunta sa awareness because they became symbols. No, that's why we react or we respond to events because of that collective unconscious, because we share the same experiences, same with our ancestors. Okay, so before we go to that, okay, let us explain what is ego to the theory of Carl Jung. The ego is one's conscious mind, the part of the psyche that selects perceptions, thoughts, feelings, and memories that may enter consciousness. Okay? Siya yung center ng consciousness but not the core of the personality, unlike kay Freud, di ba? Na the ego decides, no, what to act, no? Ano ba susundin niya, yung id ba, super-ego, parang ganon. And here, the self is the center of the personality that is merely unconscious, largely unconscious. And you can be considered healthy, psychologically healthy, if na-balance mo, no, you are in contact with your conscious world, but you also allow yourself to experience your unconscious self. Kumbaga, i-acknowledge mo rin yung unconscious self mo. to be able to achieve yung tinatawag ni Carl Jung na individuation. Because sa theory ni Carl Jung, he conceived personality as a complex network of interacting systems that strive toward eventual harmony. Okay? So, ito yung mga complex network of interacting system. Ito yun, conscious, unconscious, yung mga archetypes, yung mga personal, collective, unconscious, male, female, the anima, and the animus, yung mga ganon, no? Yung mga elements na yun. And, kailangan mabalance mo sila. Because we possess both worlds. Diba? We follow the principle of opposites or the opposition principle na kailangan nating mabalanse. Kailangan hindi lang isa yung nagagamit mo. No, hindi lang si introversion, kundi pati si extraversion. Yan. Okay? Pero at some point, there is a dominant element or network that seems to be conscious as of the moment, but there are times na yung isa naman yung magiging dominant in your life, parang gano'n. Okay? So, okay, personal unconscious. So as I've said before, this is the land, no, that is not always covered by the sea and thus can be reclaimed, no, in comparison with the island na sinasabi ko a while ago. Here reside those perceptions, thoughts, feelings, and memories that have been put aside, and they may be easily retrieved. Yan. Kasi nga, ang consciousness can only hold only a few items at a time. We cannot, alam mo yun, hindi natin kayang isipin lahat at the same time. That's why, meron tayong mga bagay na sinasantabi muna, hindi mo na iniisip for now, and we tend to focus on what is important or what is present, and ayun, pag naman hiningi ng pagkakataon, kaya rin nating isipin yung mga nasa unconscious part. So it embraces all repressed, forgotten, or subliminally perceived experiences of one particular individual. So this is similar to Freud's unconscious level. Right? Pero sa kanya kasi, mas talagang repressed talaga or seems to be forgotten na talaga. But for Carl Jung naman, hindi naman ganun ka grabe. No? Although there are all repressed din, forgotten, or subliminally perceived experiences, but it doesn't mean na you need to, na it can damage your personality or they go to your consciousness in a distorted manner, no? Hindi ganon. Iba naman yung kay Carl Jung. And this personal unconscious, this is the aspect of unconscious that we have seen. Okay? These forgotten experiences are accessible to consciousness, even though becoming aware of some of them may be an arduous process. Kumbaga, hindi maganda, no, kung magiging aware tayo dun sa mga repressed, forgotten, and subliminal experiences natin. And according to Jung, this is one of the uniqueness of Carl Jung theory, na yung personal unconscious, when grouped into cluster, they are called complex. Kasi nga, kumbaga parang paulit-ulit mo na siyang nararanasan, and it became engraved na sa yung personality. And, this complex is an emotionally toned conglomeration of associated ideas. So this is an organized group of thoughts, feelings, and memories about a particular concept. Okay? So, a complex is said to have a constellating power. Para siyang magnet na habang nabubuhay ka, dumadami yung mga karanasan mo. Yung complex mo na yun, ina-attract niya pa yung ibang ideas tungkol sa complex na yun. For example, ayan, the mother complex, mothering, no? Yung experiences mo with your mother, pwedeng hindi ganun kaganda or ganun kaganda, diba? And then, um, meron kang experiences or meron kang personal unconscious about your own mother and also the mothers that you have known and also your own experiences of being a mother kung ikaw ay mother na, and what you have read or heard about mothering can also uh, be a part or be a ano to parang na, na, na magnet dun sa complex ng mother and other experiences of being mothered. Okay? Kasi it can be grouped around an emotional core so that the person's mother, even the word mother, sparks an emotional response that blocks the smooth flow of thought. Parang kapag sinabi mong mother, meron kagad pumapasok sa isip natin or sa feelings natin, meron kagad tayong nararamdaman at naiisip na hindi mo siya consciously iniisip, di ba? Kumbaga parang, okay, mother. Pag sinabing mother, it connotes something. No? Pwedeng nainis ka bigla, kung wala kang masyadong magandang karanasan sa nanay mo, let's say, iniwan ka ng nanay mo ng bata ka pa, or may mga nababasa ka tungkol sa mga nanay na hindi maganda, na nananakit ng mga anak nila, pag narinig mo yung salitang mother, magkakaroon ka ng ibang feeling, magkakaroon ka ng ibang thoughts, ideas, beliefs, no? Yan. Because it became a complex na, di ba? Naging complex na siya. Okay? And then, ayun. So, a mother complex is the cluster of ideas, feelings, and memories that have arisen from our own particular experiences of having been mothered. Okay? So, galing yun dun sa mga karanasan natin kung paano tayo inalagaan ng ating mga nanay. And, hindi lang yun, yung mga naririnig natin sa mga nanay ng iba, nagiging, na-attract niya yun. No? Kaya nga merong constellating power yung complex. So, habang lumalaki ka, habang nagkakaroon ka ng karanasan, padagdag ng padagdag yun. Kumakabit ng kumakabit yun. Parang magnet. That's why it's complex. That's why it became complicated. Diba? Okay. And then the collective naman has roots in the ancestral past of the entire species, inherited and passed from one generation to the next as psychic potential. Ayan. Kasi nga, yung sinasabi nating collective unconscious, this has something to do with the unconscious part or the experiences that are shared by people. Because we are human beings, we share similar experiences, similar behaviors, similar thoughts, feelings, events, experiences, diba? Because we are all human. Kaya it can be inherited and passed from one generation to the next. Yan. But not through genes, but through a psychic potential. Kumbaga parang hindi siya biological eh. Kumbaga yung pagpapasa niya, yung pagpapass from one generation is not through our DNA or whatever na biological, but psychological. Okay? And sinabi din ni Carl Jung na ang collective unconscious is transpersonal. It extends across persons. Okay? It extends across persons. Because we are human beings, we have certain things in common. Kaya universal, no? So we have these experiences with universal concepts such as God, Mother, Water, Earth, and so forth have been transmitted through the generations so that people in every climate, and time have been influenced by their primitive ancestors' primordial experiences. So, more or less, the same for people in all cultures. So, ito yung responsible for people's many myths, diba? Yung mga kung ano ng mga mythology, legends, and religious beliefs. Humans, like other animals, come into the world with inherited predisposition to act or react in certain ways. If their present experiences touch on these biologically based predispositions. Yan. And, yun nga, sabi nga natin, predisposition, ibig sabihin, lahat tayo, dahil nga humans tayo, pare-pareho tayong tao, pare-pareho tayong dumaan, or may mga things in common tayo, meron tayong predisposition on how to respond to the world in certain ways. Halimbawa, pag sinabing God, alam na yan, ano yan, kailangan dasalan, tinutulungan tayo kapag tayo ay naghihirap na or weak na, parang ganun, something to hold on to when we are not anymore in control, or when something is beyond our control, we turn to God. Because yun yung ating archetype. Ano ba yung may predisposition tayo to respond, to pray, di ba? Or to have a godly image. Parang ganun, no? Something like that. Okay? So, all human beings share certain emotions such as joy, grief, or anger. The ways of expressing these emotions may vary, but the emotions themselves are shared. So all human beings develop some form of language and symbolization. The particular words may vary, but the concepts and symbols are shared. Thus, certain archetypes and symbols reappear again and again from society to society, and they may be seen to have a common meaning. Yan. So, dahil paulit-ulit siya nangyayari, tumatatak siya dun sa ating, dun sa ating buhay. So, kahit namatay na yung mga ancestors na yun, because they have that experiences before, and we encounter the same experiences now, we may feel exactly the same as they have felt before. Parang ganun, no? Okay. That's why the workings of the collective unconscious are seen in experiences we all have had. Diba? Halimbawa, yung falling in love. Yan. So, ano na yan eh? That is part of the collective unconscious. Okay? Falling in love. Diba? Meron tayong si Cupid, no? Yung mga pinana ni Cupido, yan tayo na-attract, ganun. And when we feel overwhelmed by a piece of art or music, or being drawn to the sea, no? Bakit kaya gano'n? Ba't kaya gustong-gusto natin sa dagat? Gustong-gusto natin sa beach, no? Parang tinatawag tayo, parang hinihila tayo ng dagat, kahit na hindi tayo marunong lumangoy, di ba? And it all expresses itself in shared symbols that have universal meanings. And yun na nga, yung archetype is a universal thought, form, or predisposition to respond to the world in certain ways. It is an ancient or archaic images that derive from the collective unconscious. So parang kung sa personal unconscious, kapag pinagsama-sama mo yun, pag dumami ng dumami yun, na-repeat ng na-repeat yung experience, nagiging complex. Okay? Pero sa personal niya lang nabuhay yun. No? Kasi personal experience niya yun. So, halimbawa, yun nga, yung mother complex, marami na siyang experience sa, sa, sa isang ina, no? Pagiging ina, or inalagaan siya ng nanay niya, ganon. Pero sa archetype naman, ito yung paulit-ulit na, no? Through generation, na mga images naman, from our collective unconscious naman. Yan, archetypes. Yan, meron siyang biological basis, but it originates through the repeated experiences of humans' early ancestors. O yun na nga, no, yung kanina kong sinabi. na paulit-ulit nating naranasan yan before, yun nga, na-inlove tayo lagi, ganyan. So, lahat naman ng tao na-inlove, parang ganon. And, yun na nga, biglang magkakaroon na talaga ng archetype. Kasi yan, unconscious yan, hindi natin yan lagi naiisip. Pero it is seen through language and symbols. Yan, sabi ni Carl Jung, dreams are the main source of archetypal material. Yan, kaya yung mga dreams, meron siya mga explanation dyan. And very futuristic. It doesn't matter or it did not came from the past experiences. But, alam mo yun, yung parang, kaya mo na paniginipan yan kasi you are pulled, no? To do something, you must do something about it, or you have this objective, ganun, na ganito dapat yung gagawin mo sa buhay mo, kaya lumabas siya sa dream mo para malaman mo kung paano mo siya gagawin. So, may pagka-futuristic yung kanyang dream interpretation. Unlike kay Freud, causality, no? More on past experiences. Nakakaya mo na paninginipan yan kasi, meron kang trauma before, or meron kang wini-wish na hindi mo naman magawa sa reality, parang ganon. Okay? And some hallucination of psychotic patients also offered evidence for universal archetypes. Diba? Kasi yung mga hallucinations na yan, it came from the subjective world of the patient with schizophrenia or yung mga may psychosis. Diba? And dahil subjective siya, it is part of unconscious, di ba? Hindi mo nakikita, abstract, ganun. And dahil ang archetype ay unconscious, so meaning to say, probably, yung mga na-hallucinate nila, pare-parehas din. No? Meron siyang archetypal, images. Okay? Okay, so here we are talking about the different archetypes. So, first we have the persona archetype. So, ito yung ating parang mask, no, na pinapakita natin sa mundo. This is the side of the personality that people show to the world. Refers to the mask worn by actors in the early theater. So, for Carl Jung, this is his number one personality o yung extroverted personality. Ito yung pinapakita niya na pasok, no, sa lipunan na ginagalawan niya. So, kung tayo bilang mga ordinary citizen, persona means this is what we present to people around us. This is the personality that we present or we exhibit, no, in our daily living. So, ito yung pinapakita mo. Ito yung nakikita nila sa'yo. Yung persona na archetype na yan. So, we should project a particular role that society dictates to us. And to become psychologically healthy, must balance between the demands of society and what we truly are. Yan. So, hindi naman masama, no, na hindi naman kaplastikan na matuturing na yung pinapakita mo is yung gusto makita sa'yo ng society, no? Kundi, kumbaga parang normal part, natural part ng personality natin na meron talaga tayong persona, which is, yun nga, yung mga katanggap-tanggap na mga characteristic, traits, qualities sa ginagalawan natin na lipunan or sa paligid natin. So, that is our persona archetype. The one that we show to the world. Okay? And then, another part is, or another archetype is the shadow. The shadow is the counterpart of the persona. Okay? Kasi nga, sabi nga ni Carl Jung, his theory of personality follows the principle of opposites. Diba? The opposition principle. Archetype of darkness and repression. Qualities we do not wish to acknowledge but attempt to hide from ourselves and others. So, kung yung persona, yun yung mga qualities na pinapakita natin outside ito naman yung ayaw nating ipakita. Okay? Kaya lang, minsan, napapakita natin siya kahit na hindi sinasadya, no, sa mga hindi sinasadyang pamamaraan, or kailangan mo lang din siyang i-accept, no? Kailangan mo rin siyang i-acknowledge, hindi lang itago, no? Alam mo na meron kang ganun, alam mo na meron kang dark side, alam mo na meron kang hindi magandang mga katangian bilang tao, but the mere fact na ito ay i-accept mo, i-acknowledge mo, then dun magkakaroon ng harmony, dun magkakaroon ng balance, and ma-achieve mo yung tinatawag ni Carl Jung na individuation. Okay? So, sinasabi nga ni Carl Jung din na the first test of courage is to accept the shadow. Ayan. Or to conquer the shadow in some textbooks. Okay. So, it is easier to project the dark side of our personality onto others, to see in them the ugliness and evil that we refuse to see in ourselves. Achieve the realization of the shadow. Sabi nga, unless you learn to face your own shadow, you will continue to see them in others. Because the world outside you is only a reflection of the world inside you. Okay? So, yun doon pinapakita yung parang extrovert, yun yung outside, introvert, yun yung inside. And yun nga, mas madali daw na makita mo sa ibang tao yung part ng sarili mo na ayaw mo sa sarili. Pero kay Freud, ang tawag niya doon ay defense mechanism, di ba, yung projection. And at the same time, meron ding introjection. Pero kay Carl Jung, it's normal. No? We possess both the persona and the shadow. But learning to face your own shadow, to accept it, to acknowledge it, will prompt you to individuation, to self-realization. Anima. The anima, ito yung feminine archetype in men. It represents the irrational moods and feelings. Okay? So, dahil it refers to a female archetype, so yung kanyang characteristic ng anima is more likely a female. No? So, irrational, illogical, emotional. So, kaya yung mga lalaki, aminin man nila o hindi, meron silang emotional side. Diba? Meron silang femininity. Yan. To master the projections of the anima, men must realize the feminine side of their personality. It originated from early men's experiences with women, mothers, sisters, and lovers. Of course, no? Doon ang galing yan, yung mga common experiences ng mga lalaki sa mga babae. Source of misunderstanding in male-female relationships, but also be responsible for the alluring mystic woman has in the psyche of men. So, sinasabi rin sa theory ni Carl Jung na yung archetype na anima, ito yung kadalasan na hinahanap ng isang lalaki sa mapapangasawa niya or to the woman that he will be attracted to. No? Yung bang hinahanap niya yung magmamatch dun sa kanyang anima. Okay? Parang ganun. In Memories, Dreams, Reflections, yung vividly describe this experience intrigued by this woman from within. No? Kasi nakausap niya daw no, yung kanyang anima. That is the first time that he nakilala niya no, or interacted with his anima. She must be the soul, sabi niya, in the primitive sense. And I began to speculate on the reasons why the name anima was given to the soul. Why was it thought of as feminine? Later, I came to see that this inner feminine figure plays a typical or archetypal role in the unconscious of a man, and I called her the anima. The corresponding figure in the unconscious of woman, I called the animus. Yan. So, in corresponding sa babae naman, meron din naman tayong tinatawag na animus archetype or the masculinity. Alright? So, the animus' deceptive qualities were elucidated by Jung in his description of the woman from within. who spoke to him during his journey into the unconscious and while he was contemplating whether his work was science. So, ito yung time na nandun siya sa creative illness niya tinatawag, no? Yung during the middle age. Actually, yun nga, of course, wala naman talagang kumausap, kundi siya rin naman yun, no? Parang masyado lang in-exaggerated. But this woman from within, talagang lumabas, no? Dun sa journey niya, papunta dun sa kanyang unconscious. Kasi nga, ang mga archetype ay unconscious, no? Collective unconscious. So, habang nilalakbay niya yung kanyang unconscious part of the mind, na-meet niya yung kanyang anima. What the anima said seemed to me full of a deep cunning. If I had taken these fantasies of the unconscious as art, they would have carried no more conviction than visual perceptions. As if I were watching a movie, I would have felt no moral obligation toward them. The anima might then have easily seduced me into believing that I was a misunderstood artist, and that my so-called artistic nature gave me the right to neglect reality. If I had followed her voice, she would in all probability have said to me one day, "Do you imagine the nonsense you're engaged in is really art?" Not a bit. Thus, the insinuations of the anima, the mouthpiece of the unconscious, can utterly destroy a man. Yan. Kaya may mga lalaki na masyadong, alam niyo yun, yung makismo, ayaw nilang i-acknowledge yung femininity sa kanilang mga sarili kasi nga, it depicts weakness, it depicts vulnerability, na parang yun nga, it can destroy you as a man, no, nawawala yung pagkalalaki mo if masyado ka malambot or kung feminine ka, masyado, ganyan. So, yun. And being artistic, being creative is also linked to being a woman or to the being feminine. And, yun. So, kaya si Carl Jung siguro, kaya niya na-meet yung kanyang anima is because nung time na yun, pumupunta na siya dun sa kanyang introverted personality, which is, yun nga yung subjective reality niya, no? Na dun niya nakilala yung kanyang anima or yung feminine side niya, na meron pala siyang artistic nature, no? Na he can be vulnerable, he can be weak, illogical, irrational sometimes. So, parang ganun. Okay? And then, the animus is the masculine archetype in women. It represents symbolic of thinking and reasoning. Yan. Kasi nga, yung masculinity also depicts logic. Yan. Thinking, nag-iisip, no? Kaya kapag babae, di ka nag-iisip. Yan. Inuuna mo yung emotions mo. Masyado ka emotional pag babae. Diba? Pag lalaki, sila yung nag-iisip, sila yung rational, yan. Sila yung decisive, no? But of course, it's just a masculine characteristic. But each one of us, male or female, we possess both the anima and the animus. Parang ganon. No? We both, yun nga, we are having these opposite archetypes. And we must balance them out. Even if we're female, we must acknowledge our masculinity, our thinking, our reasoning, diba? And even if you're male, you must acknowledge your emotionality, your vulnerability. Yan. So like the anima, the animus appears in dreams, visions, and fantasies in a personified form. In every female-male relationship, the woman runs a risk of projecting her distant ancestors' experiences with fathers, brothers, lovers, and sons onto the unsuspecting man. Alright. Great Mother. Yan. Ito naman, isa rin tong archetype, no? Na medyo hawigin dun sa mother complex din. So, sa Great Mother, this pre-existing concept of mother is always associated with both positive and negative feelings. So if you could remember from the object relations theory, merong bad and good breast, 'di ba? Merong badness and goodness sa isang ina. No, hindi lang naman siya all nurturing mother, but of course, pwede rin siyang maging destructive, powerful, and destroyer, no? Pwede siyang maging ganun. Pero at the same time, siya rin yung nagno-nourish, siya rin yung nag-care, yan. So, the Great Mother therefore represents two opposing forces. Fertility and nourishment, kasi siya yung nagbigay buhay sa'yo, siya yung nagpaanak, siya yung nanganak para sa'yo, no? And siya yung nag-alaga, siya yung nag-aruga. But on the one hand, pwede rin siya maging powerful and destructive. Yan. The fertility and nourishment dimension of the Great Mother archetype is symbolized by a tree, garden, plowed field, sea, heaven, home, country, church, and hollow objects such as ovens and cooking utensils. And other hollow objects and carrier like ships, boats, airplanes, cars, di ba? Kaya kadalasan ang pinapangalan natin sa mga sasakyan is babae, pangalan ng babae. Kasi nga, they symbolize fertility and nourishment. And yun namang sa mga typhoon, if you could notice, di ba, they are also named female, no? As female. Kasi destructive ang mga typhoon storms, di ba? Although ngayon, may mga cases na pinapangalan na rin ng lalaki. Kasi for equality purposes, I think, no? Kaya ganon. But, yun nga, kaya babae kasi, yun, Mother Earth. Earth, nature, bibigay ng life. However, it can also be destructive, di ba? So, yan. She is sometimes symbolized as a godmother, di ba? Sa mga fairy tale, yung mga godmother, fairy godmother, usually they give power to the baby or they give curses, no? Yan. Witch, yan. Ano din yan? Great mother, ano din yan? Archetype din. The mother of God, the mother nature, mother earth, a stepmother, or a witch. Legends, myths, religious beliefs, art, and literary stories are filled with other symbols of the Great Mother, a person who is both nurturing and destructive. Fertility and power combine to form the concept of rebirth. Yan. So, pag kinumbine naman daw yung dalawang opposing forces, di ba? It becomes rebirth, which may be a separate archetype according to Carl Jung. But its relation to the Great Mother is obvious, no? Kasi nga fertility and power. So, if it becomes a separate archetype as rebirth, no, yung mga nito, yung reincarnation, no? And yung baptism, parang nabuhay kang muli, nagbagong buhay, ganyan. In every destruction, there comes beginning. Parang ganun. Diba? Yan, resurrection, di ba namatay, nilibing, nabuhay ulit. Parang ganun, diba? And individuation or self-realization. And individuation, self-realization in a person begins when a person acknowledges all her challenges, struggles in life. If he or she learns from it, grow from it, di ba? And do not commit the same mistakes again. And that is rebirth. See? Oh. Kumbaga parang, yes, we can live. Di ba? Pwede tayo mabuhay ng matiwasay, maginhawa. But at the same time, pwede rin tayong mawasak. Pwede tayong masaktan, magka-problema, ma-stress. Pero after nun, after mo ma-overcome yun, acknowledge mo lang na part yun ng buhay mo, then, pwede kang makapunta, pwede mong ma-achieve yung rebirth, no, yung individuation. Alright? Parang yung dinidepict nung story ni Christ, ni Jesus Christ, when he was tortured and put to death in a cross, then he died, di ba? And then he rose again from the dead. So, and that seems to be a kind of individuation and self-realization. People throughout the world are moved by a desire to be reborn. Of course, diba? We want that. That is to reach self-realization, the nirvana, the heaven or perfection. O, diba? Yan, yung perfection na yan, actually, um, concept din yan sa, ano to, sa humanistic existential. No? Pero, hindi masyadong, ano, kumbaga mas positive yung dating. Dito kasi, hindi masyado pang na-clarify. No? Part lang siya ng archetype na, yun nga, na yung rebirth, ano talaga eh, meron tayong predisposition or we are predisposed to act or respond to the world to become new, to become perfect, 'di ba? Gusto natin maging complete. Gusto natin lahat na kumbaga kaya kaya tayo bumabangon sa mga problema kasi nga gusto nating maging buo. Yan. Kaya pini-pick up natin yung mga pieces natin, yung mga broken pieces after heartbreak, after a problem, because we want to be reborn. We want to become individual. Yan. And realize the self. And another archetype is the wise old man. Archetype of wisdom and meaning symbolizes humans' pre-existing knowledge of the mysteries of life. Yan, political, religious, social prophets who appeal to reason as well as emotion are guided by this unconscious archetype. Yan, so they are, wise old man is personified in dreams as the father, grandfather, yan. Kadalasan sila yung mga lolo, no? Pag sinabi mo lolo, wise old man, kumbaga marami ng pinagdaanan, marami ng wisdom, lahat ng sasabihin niya, paniniwalaan mo, susundin mo, mamamangha ka, diba? Teacher, ganun din. Yan. Philosopher, guru, doctor, or priest. Yan. So we are, ano mo yun, all of us have a teacher in us, diba? We act as we are the one who knows, diba? Parang may mga ganun tayong behavior na parang alam natin, no? Na alika dito, tuturuan kita, ganito lang yan. Yeah, mahilig tayong mag-inform, di ba? Mahilig tayong magturo, mahilig tayong magbigay ng advice. Yeah, mahilig tayong magbigay ng mga advice na according sa ating mga karanasan. Okay? So, he also appears in the fairy tales as the king, the sage, the magician who comes to the aid of the troubled protagonist, and through superior wisdom, he helps the protagonist escape from myriad misadventures. Parang yung sa Aladdin, di ba? Ano yun? Yung sa lamp, no? Si Genie, yun. O, yan. Parang wise old man yung, ano, no, pinoportray na archetype. Yan. Siya yung may alam. Nabibigyan niya ng magic, ng pagbabago, ganyan, na wisdom. Okay? And then the hero. The hero archetype is represented in mythology and legends as a powerful person, sometimes part god, who fights against great odds to conquer or vanquish evil in the form of dragons, monsters, serpents, or demons. Heroic deeds can be performed only by someone who is vulnerable. Okay, tingnan nyo yung opposite element. Powerful, pero vulnerable. See? So, hindi daw pwedeng maging hero kung wala kang kahinaan. Hindi yun pwede. An immortal person with no weakness cannot be a hero. Cannot. Kaya sa mga palabas na kung saan may mga hero, kaya tayo mahilig manood din ng mga hero movies, di ba? Mga Avengers, mga ganyan, Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, Wonder Woman, kung ano-ano pa mga man, di ba? Kasi nga, nakaka-relate tayo dun eh, na sa buhay natin, We want to be powerful. We want to control our lives. However, we have this vulnerability. We have this weakness. Yan. And to overcome that weakness is to become powerful. And then we end up happily ever after. Diba? Parang ganun. So when the hero conquers the villain, he or she frees us from feelings of impotence and misery. At the same time, serving as our model for the ideal personality. Yan. Kasi yun yung gusto natin eh. Diba? Gusto natin na ma-overcome yung mga struggles, yung mga challenges to perfection, individuation, self-realization. Okay? Yan. Kaya lang, yun nga, very idealistic, di ba? Ang pagiging hero. Kasi, parang ang hirap niyang paniwalaan dahil, yun nga, lahat tayo may kahinaan and hindi laging perfect. Laging magkakamali. Laging matutumba. Kahit na nagtagumpay ka na ngayon, pero may chance pa rin na bumaksak ka ulit. Di ba? Kasi tao tayo. That's why. But nevertheless, we have this archetype hero to respond or to act that way. No? We have this predisposing factor to stand up again, to conquer the challenges, the darkness. Yan. To be in control, to be powerful. And of course, the self. The self is also an archetype. Sabi niya, each person possesses an inherited tendency to move toward growth, perfection, and completion. And he called this innate disposition as the self. So if you could notice, kay Freud, most likely mas naka-incline sa past, di ba? Kumbaga parang walang growth. Parang kung ano ka dati, kaya ka ganyan ngayon, kasi ganito ka dati. So, kaya ka nagkakaganyan ngayon. Hindi na mababago yan. Babalik at babalik ka dyan. Sabi ni Freud, the past self or the past behaviors, the determinant of your present behavior. Parang gano'n, no? Pero kay Carl Jung, medyo alalay siya. May growth daw. Oo nga, meron kang past. But the past doesn't define who you are. Meron kang power to change, no, your present so that ma-change ang future. Okay? Kasi gusto nga natin, no, we are inclined to move towards perfection and completion, which could never be happen. It can never be happen. Only God is perfect, sabi nga, di ba? Kasi nga siya yung nakarating doon sa kaluwalhatian na sinasabi, yung namatay, nabuhay ulit, parang ganon. We can never do that. We can never be perfect. And archetype of archetypes, yun ang self, no? Archetype of archetypes. Because it pulls together the other archetypes and unites them in the process of self-realization. It's symbolized by a person's ideas of perfection, completion, and wholeness. Yan. Kaya ang symbol niya, mandala. No? Alam niyo yung mandala? Yung sa mga, yung mga, ano to? Yung nauso dati na may mga kinokoloran na mga mindfulness activity, may mga picture na may circle within a square within a circle. No? Yung parang pantay-pantay siya, marami siyang sides, pero balance. Across is an example of a mandala. Kasi it depicts balance. It depicts harmony. It represents the strivings of the collective unconscious for unity, balance, and wholeness. Okay, so here is the self or the mandala. Yan yung sinasabi ko kanina na itsura. Di ba yung parang, yun nga yung mga meditational mindfulness activity na kinokoloran, ganyan. Parang ganun. And, so, yan, mandala is a spiritual and ritual symbol in Hinduism and Buddhism representing the universe. The basic form of most mandalas is a square within four gates containing a circle with a center point. Each gate is in the general shape of a mandala, often exhibit radial balance. So, ganun lang naman. Kaya lang naman yun yung nagsisimbol sa self kasi nga, balanse. Diba? Lahat ng, kung ano yung nakikita mo sa kaliwa, yun din yung nakikita mo sa kanan. Kaya, it represents the self. Okay? The self includes both the conscious and unconscious mind, and it unites the opposing elements of the psyche, the male and female, the good and evil, light and dark forces. He later wrote, ito symbol din yan, yung yin-yang, di ba? Ano din yan, archetype din siya of the self, no? He later wrote, the essential thing is to differentiate oneself from these unconscious contents by personifying them and at the same time to bring them into relationship with consciousness. Okay? So parang pareho sila ni Freud, no? Na para daw, yun nga, maging healthy ang personality mo, you should bring into the awareness the unconscious, no? Make the unconscious conscious. Parang ganun. Pero dito kasi, kay Carl Jung, ang kaibahan ng kanya, you bring them together. Okay? They are not separate entity, but once you bring them together, they become whole. They become whole image. Yung consciousness at saka itong unconsciousness. Diba? Para magkaroon ng balance. That is the technique for stripping them of their power, sabi ni Carl Jung. Kasi hindi pwedeng masyado kang govern ng conscious or masyadong puro unconscious, di ba? It is not too difficult to personify them as they always possess a certain degree of autonomy, a separate identity of their own. Their autonomy is a most uncomfortable thing to reconcile oneself to, and yet the very fact that the unconscious presents itself in that way gives us the best means of handling it. And then, ito yung tinatawag niyang progression and regression. Sabi ni Jung, he believed that the regressive step is necessary to create a balanced personality and to grow toward self-realization. And adaptation to the outside world involves the forward flow of psychic energy and is called progression. So, meaning to say, yung progression, palabas, pa-forward. The regression, paatras. No? Pabaliktad. Yan. And, yun nga, and adaptation to the inner world. No? Yung dalawa niyan, we are pushed, no, towards the past, and yet we are pulled toward the future. Yan. To create balance. Hindi pwede na puro tayo regression, na fix na tayo dun sa nakaraan. Okay? Kailangan pareho sila. That's why yung theory ni Carl Jung is in the middle of causality and teleology. And that ends the second part of Carl Jung's theory.